We begin with the fractious issue of Palestine and Israel in the U.S. news media, the boundaries around that discussion, who gets to set them, and what, ultimately, is allowed to be said. Last week, a CNN contributor, a commentator the network had on its payroll, delivered a speech at the United Nations in support of Palestinian self-determination and equal rights. Less than 24 hours later, CNN was done with Marc Lamont Hill. When you boil it down, he was fired for using the following 6 words: from the river to the sea. That was deemed anti-Semitic. Hill's dismissal came on the heels of a seemingly coordinated attack by pro-Israel groups that have come to have a large say over what constitutes acceptable discourse on Palestine in the U.S. by willfully conflating legitimate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism and then convincing news outlets to do the same. It wasn't that long ago that CNN adopted the slogan, "Facts first." When it comes to Israel, though, it's much more complicated than that. Some facts are clearly more inconvenient than others. Our starting point this week is the UN's headquarters in New York City.
It is with great honor and humility that I accept the opportunity to speak before you.
The speech lasted 21 minutes and 7 seconds.
The Israeli nation-state continues to restrict freedom and undermine equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as those in the West Bank and Gaza.
It consisted of 2,837 words.
I promise you that I will not exhaust all of my time by enumerating every human rights violation perpetrated by the Israeli government.
Had the speech been 6 words shorter, Marc Lamont Hill would still be employed by CNN, had he ended it like this.
Give us what justice requires, and that is a free Palestine.
Instead, he chose to end it like this.
A free Palestine, from the river to the sea.
When Marc Lamont Hill says a free Palestine from the river to the sea, he is acknowledging that Palestinians aren't just clustered in the West Bank and Gaza, but in fact we are from places like Akka and Jaffa and Majdad and the Galilee and all parts of Palestine. And the significance of this is that Israel has always sought to erase this historic fact. They're not just objecting to use of the words from the river to the sea, but Palestine.
Now, I understand why the vagueness of that term may lead some to misinterpret it. I understand that somebody who identifies as a pro-Israel Zionist may have an issue with a one-state vision because equal rights for everyone would effectively mean the end of the Jewish state, a state that privileges the Jewish population over the non-Jewish population. That's why we see people resorting to a smear campaign.
So CNN not only had every right to fire him, this was a piece of open anti-Semitism.
Effectively misdirecting what those words actually mean.
That's right out of a Hamas script that calls for the annihilation of Israel.
That is not what that phrase means at all.
People decided to zoom in on what was supposedly the true subtext of what he's saying. It's an active search to find a delegitimizing sentence that reveals some nefarious intent in a call for freedom. And we see that over and over again. And one of the main drivers to that force is the conflation between critique of Israel and anti-Semitism.
In the 20-minute speech, he said many righteous and important things about the plight of Palestinians. At the same time, you know, if somebody gave a beautiful speech and then in the middle of it said the N-word, we would be right to sort of focus on that. Now again, I don't think that the phrase "from the river to the sea" is necessarily anti-Semitic, but it was interpreted that way by many Jews, and so I think it was fair to focus on that.
But how was that interpretation arrived at? The Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish NGO based in the U.S., said Lamont Hill's use of the phrase "from the river to the sea" meant that he was calling for the end of the State of Israel. The ADL describes itself as a civil rights organization that fights bigotry and anti-Semitism in the U.S. However, it has little or no tolerance for those who question Israeli government policies. Collectively, pro-Israel lobby groups in Washington, including the ADL, AIPAC, the Jewish Federation of America, and others, are the kings of conflation. They carry a lot of weight with politicians and the media alike. And when CNN saw the online pushback to what Lamont Hill had said, it just rolled over and cut him loose.
This is definitely an organized campaign that is attempting to misrepresent Hill's views. Somebody like Ben Shapiro, who is a host at Fox News right now, is openly an advocate of Israel ethnically cleansing Palestinians from the Palestinian territories. Seth Mandel, who is the editor of the Washington Examiner, made the most egregious charge against Hill, accusing him of advocating for genocide. And CNN, by caving to the smear campaign, is absolutely playing into the hands of people who want to make the conflation and are undermining free speech in the process.
There's definitely a problem right now in the public sphere where some versions of anti-Zionism or opposition to Israel are immediately called by some on the right anti-Semitic. This is, of course, a huge problem. In terms of what Marc Lamont Hill said, I think CNN was thinking probably about its viewers and about the Jewish community and saying, well, the majority of the community viewed this as deeply problematic, as something that threatens their very existence, and so they made the decision based on that.
CNN essentially perpetuated this narrative, this false dichotomy, this idea that you have to choose. Don't critique Israel or be anti-Semitic. It's even more problematic because of the positive role that it could play in this conflict and this narrative. That discussion will not be on CNN because they fired Dr. Hill. But that will be a perfect place and a perfect opportunity to have this discussion.
Michael Oren is with us.
With us now from Massachusetts, Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Rick Santorum, thanks so much for being here, Senator.
Thank you, Jake.
CNN's treatment of the Middle East conflict can be measured not just in the pro-Israel voices it pays to provide punditry, like the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, Michael Oren, ex-U.S. Senator Rick Santorum, and lawyer Alan Dershowitz, but in the airtime they are given.
Israel wants peace.
Even the Anti-Defamation League has said Oren's opinions verge on conspiracy theories, yet he's still a paid CNN contributor and is often interviewed by Wolf Blitzer. Blitzer's bio on CNN's news site is as revealing about the network as it is about him. It's an extensive and detailed summary of a career going back 40 years. But nowhere does CNN mention
Now I'd like to address Mr. Blitzer.
that in the 1980s, Blitzer worked at AIPAC. He was a paid lobbyist for Israel.
For all of us should be delighted that we happen to be around at a time in this world when there is this Israel.
We wrote to CNN with a series of questions on this story, but did not hear back. And Wolf Blitzer is not just another face on the network. He is CNN's lead political anchor.
It's institutional. It's embedded in the fabric of CNN. They bolster it with guests like Michael Oren.
Israel will take whatever measures are necessary to defend its citizens.
And Rick Santorum, for example, denying that Palestinians even exist.
And all the people that live in the West Bank are Israelis. They're not Palestinians. There is no Palestinian.
All these people get to stay on CNN. And Wolf Blitzer, who is, an ardent Zionist and with a history of working for the Israeli lobby, he gets to frame the story. And rarely do Palestinians ever get a voice on CNN.
It is really interesting to compare the discourse about Israel and Palestine among Israelis and among Americans. When I moved to the United States, I was surprised that the word occupation was uncomfortable to some pro-Israel advocates.
I don't buy the whole idea that the United Nations is calling it an occupation. I mean, this is Israel.
In Israel, you do have people talking about the occupation. Until there is a movement in the establishment of the United States politics that can utter these words, that can say, what is the problem that we need to solve? And that will be very far from a solution.
The pro-Israel lobby's work to influence American political discourse extends into academia. The Canary Mission is a website that compiles dossiers on pro-Palestinian college students and professors in the U.S. Some of those named on it say it's akin to a blacklist designed to intimidate them into silence. Al Jazeera has investigated the site, but that documentary has yet to be broadcast, leading some to speculate that even Al Jazeera is not immune to pressure from the pro-Israel lobby in the U.S., which the network denies. Professor Marc Lamont Hill, an academic now deposed from the media platform CNN gave him, would know both sides of that story. But, as of this writing, he's not talking. which is the whole point of the exercise.
It is crucial for people to understand the magnitude of the threat to free speech in the form of denying the ability of pro-Palestine activists to be part of the narrative in the United States. This takes many forms. We are facing a very serious threat to free speech in the form of denying the right to speak honestly about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the right to advocate on it.